Hey, good evening and welcome. Welcome back to Wednesday night and our Wednesday night Bible study here at Calvary Chapel Heartland called The Word on Wednesdays. And if you've been with us, you know we're in the book of Judges. We're still there. We're going to look at a new judge tonight, a man that many of you are probably familiar with, at least you've heard the name, Samson. And so we're going to be beginning to look at that, beginning in chapter 13 tonight. But before we get into any of that, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, oh Lord, once again we come to you with just grateful hearts and open arms, Lord, and just pray that you, Lord, would just bless us here tonight. That you would fill this place, Lord, with your Spirit. That you would speak to us through this word, through this study. Father, that you would reach each and every one of us in that special way that message that we need to hear. Again, thank you for these men and women and this body of believers, Lord, that come out faithfully to hear your word. Thank you for the opportunity you give us to be able to meet openly and to study your word. Because not everyone has this privilege. And so we just, again, give you all the glory and all the praise and ask you to join us here right now and speak to us, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. And amen. So again, we've been in the book of Judges, and last week, or over the last couple of weeks really, we found that the Israelites had lived for a few years under 2 or 3 different judges, doing relatively good until we see where they had done evil in the sight of the Lord once again. And then they had been sold into the hands of their enemies. Another 18 years of oppression had gone by. They eventually cried out. And God actually refused to help them at first when they cried out, if you'll recall. He said, basically, you go to the other God, right? That your God that you want to serve now. But then they continue to cry out. He heard their cry. He had compassion. It actually says his soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. And so, that being said, he raised up that man Jephthah, right? And then we saw that whole story play out over the last 2 weeks. He was a man of valor. And he began to deal with the people of Ammon that they had been under oppression of, one of the peoples. And he tried to go to him at first, right, and have a diplomatic solution. Of course, they wouldn't listen. They had a war. Jephthah was victorious. He was successful. But even after being successful in defeating the enemies they were under oppression by, we saw then there was an internal conflict with the tribe of Ephraim. And we saw that even Gideon had a conflict with the tribe of Ephraim. And so he has to deal with that. That's all been taken care of. And then he judged for 6 years. Only 6 years. And then he died. And then that led to the next 3 judges, another 25 years or so. Things seem to be going good again. And we see, as we've talked about over and over through this book, this cycle. After another 25 or 30 years or so, things have been going good. The cycle repeats again. And that's where we come to the beginning of this chapter, where we see that people do evil in the sight of the Lord again. And that's where we begin chapter 13. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up and we'll get started. We're going to begin right at the beginning of the chapter in verse 1. Where it says, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So this time now they're going to be under oppression by the Philistines for 40 years. This cycle, sin, bondage, repentance, deliverance, blessing, sin, bondage, deliverance. I mean, we see it go all over and over. But this time, is going to bring about this next judge, Samson. We're going to see him being born and raised for this specific purpose. And so, and we're going to see Samson, he's kind of a study in contrast, right? He's a man of great strengths, but he's also a man of great weakness. He's a man blessed by God in some ways, but he's a man who continually sins against God. And so we see this picture of this man, and he's a picture of Israel's whole history during this period, and particularly, but also generally, as we see him go through the similar cycle. And we'll talk more about that next week. He's really a picture of great heights and of deep lows. And he's an important example. He's an important example of what we see as unfulfilled potential. Because even though he did great things for God, it's staggering to consider what he might have done had he been wholly sold out for God. Morgan, in his commentary, put it this way: one of the strangest stories of the Old Testament, the story of Samson, is a story of great opportunity and a disastrous failure in the case of a man who might have wrought a great deliverance but failed. But let's look at this story a little closer and see what we can gain and what we can learn from it. Because of Israel's sin and rebellion, God is going to raise him up, and he's going to get their attention. And he does that by putting them under subjugation to the Philistines, right? For 40 years. And while they're under subjugation to the Philistines, then he begins at the beginning. He raises up this guy. Look at verse 2. Now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. So the first thing we see here, first the town of Zorah. It's west of Jerusalem, just a few miles, maybe 14, 15 miles west of Jerusalem. It was in the land of the tribe of Dan. These are the Danites. And we see that the angel of the Lord appeared. And from the rest of the chapter, we're going to see that this angel was just not a mere angel, right? Again, as we see in the book of Judges and many other places, this was Jesus himself on a special mission, appearing as a man before his incarnation in Bethlehem many years to come. But this is the Lord. And he says, you are barren. You have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. And we've seen that promise given to someone in the past as well. It boggles the mind sometimes when people talk about the whole issue revolved around women's rights and children and bearing children. God is the one who brings forth life. God is the one that opens the womb and closes the womb. Don't ever forget that. And God tells her, you're going to bear a son. And that to this woman had to be a blessing because she had been barren. And for them, that was a big deal to have children, to carry on the family name. And so he continues, this angel of the Lord continues with this message. He says in verse 4, Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. The child shall be a Nazarite to God. Back in Numbers, if you recall that study when we did Numbers, chapter 6, it describes this vow of a Nazarite. And generally when someone was under this vow, the people under that vow were considered or regarded themselves as being specially devoted to God. They would leave their hair uncut. They'd drink no wine. They'd eat no grape products at all from the vineyards. They avoided any contact with anything dead. They stayed ceremonially clean, if you will. And this child that's going to be born, God himself, the angel of the Lord, tells this woman that she needs to even be careful during her pregnancy what she eats and drinks, because the child in her womb is going to be dedicated from the womb all the way till his death, to the Lord, to God. Normally, when someone would take this vow, it was for a specific period of time. It was not a lifetime thing, but for Samson, it's going to be a lifetime thing. He was unusual in that way. And so his mother, being instructed how she was even to act, she immediately goes now, is going to go, we're going to see here in a minute, and tell her husband what's going on. But because the child was going to be dedicated from in the womb, then she has to act and while she's pregnant in the same way. And why? Why was he going to be dedicated? It tells us right here, he's going to be dedicated to God because he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Notice the wording here too. He shall begin to deliver Israel. You really don't see complete deliverance from the Philistines. The very end of the story, he will take a lot of the Philistines out with him. But ultimately, he had so much potential. He goes on, though, in verse 6, and we see her response. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, "A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God. Very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death." So she recognizes, she says, a man of God came to me. So that tells us that this appearance of this angel of the Lord appeared in human form, like a man. Yet his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God. He appeared like a man, but he had the countenance of God himself. It's Jesus. Jesus Christ. And even though he appears this way, she was so struck by it, she couldn't even bring herself to ask the question of, where are you from, or who are you? What's your name? So her husband now, look at his response in verse 8. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born." And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field, but Manoah, her husband, was not with her. And then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, "Look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me." And so Manoah arose and followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." Notice that word, I am. You heard that before? Manoah said, "Now let your words come to pass. What will the boy's rule of life and his work? What will be the boy's rule of life and his work?" So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "All of that I said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat anything that comes from the wine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I commanded her, let her observe." In other words, he just reconfirmed what he had told her the first time. He had already been told, the husband, Manoah, had already been told by the wife what this angel of the Lord had said the first time. But he wanted confirmation, and so he prays to God, send him again. And God listens to his prayer, and God sends him again. And this time, when he appears before the woman goes and gets the husband, and now the husband gets to ask, and he just reconfirms. So God honored this husband's prayer to give confirmation to what was supposed to be taking place, what was going to happen with this son, and how the wife was to conduct herself during her pregnancy. And the confirmation came in the form of just simply saying, this is what I told her to do, now just obey. That's all you need to know. Obey. Do what I've called you to do. And so Manoah then, in verse 15, then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know he was the angel of the Lord. And then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? That when your words come to pass, we may honor you. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? Here, the angel of the Lord shows himself to be God, in the sense that he didn't need a meal to eat. He would accept a sacrifice, a sacrificial offering made to the Lord. You want to feed me? Then offer a sacrifice, a burnt offering, because I'm the Lord. And you ask who I am, what my name is. Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? We've talked about this angel of the Lord and it being Christ and Jesus. I want us to pay close attention here. He actually shows himself to be Jesus by taking the name wonderful in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6 specifically says, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His name shall be called Wonderful. And here in Judges, the angel of the Lord says, why you ask my name when you can see it is wonderful? So Manoah, in verse 19, he goes on, he says, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering, and he offered it up upon the rock to the Lord. Excuse me. And he did a wondrous thing while Manoah and his wife looked on. It happened as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife, then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So not only did he accept their offer of a sacrifice, but he did something wondrous in front of them to show them exactly who he was. He ascended in the flame in heaven. And then Manoah knew and understood exactly who this person was. He was just no mere messenger, but he was the Lord. What a blessing. What a confirmation for this husband and wife, for this child that they're going to bring into the world to be a blessing to God, right? And so verse 22 goes on, it says, and Manoah said to his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. But his wife said to him, if the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time. And maybe it's because Manoah remembers he knew Scripture. He knew the stories from Moses and Exodus. And he says that you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. Maybe he's thinking that, and he's thinking, now that we've seen God, we're going to die. But the wife assures him, the wife says, hold on a minute. If the Lord had really desired to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted the offering. And we have the privilege now of looking back and saying, well, we see that as Christ, as part of the triune God, but not God the Father himself. And no one can see the Father. And we can put all those scriptures together now and get a clear picture of the triune God. But for them, it was just God. And they didn't know. Christ hadn't been born yet. But she understood. She understood something that he didn't. Deep down, he had promised. He's promised me a child to be dedicated to him. He's not going to kill us now. And it was because of her faith. And it was because of her faith that encouraged her husband. And notice she didn't chastise her husband. She didn't go, you're such unbeliever, right? She just encouraged him. And her faith and her encouragement really seemed to be predicated on the fact that, one, he accepted our offering. And he's made this promise. And the Lord keeps his promises. And it's that same principle that worked for us today, right? If the Lord wanted to do you evil, he would have never accepted the offering that was given on your behalf. The offering of his only Son, Jesus Christ, for you and for I. You see, the Lord is not the one that is out to get us. He's accepted the offering. Spurgeon put it this way, brother, if the Lord had meant to destroy us, he would not have shown us our sin, because we were happy enough previously, weren't we not? In our own poor way, we were content enough, and if he did not mean to pardon us, it was not like the Lord to show us our sin, and so to torment us before our time, unless he meant to take it away. What a blessing. Thank you, Jesus. But for this woman, for her husband, for this child that's about to be born, this account continues in verse 24. So the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahaneh Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. And so the promise from the angel of the Lord was fulfilled. And she did bear a child, and she bore a son. And so it was proven to be true. And that's the thing. All of God's promises will be fulfilled and will prove to be true. And we can count on that. And the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him. Again, we see the triune God. We see the Spirit. We've seen that all through the Old Testament. Don't let anyone ever tell you that Jesus is just a New Testament God. God the Father is the Old Testament God, and the Holy Spirit only came at Pentecost. It's the first time we ever... The triune God was from the very beginning and is all the way through all of the Old Testament and New Testament. All three persons. And we see that time and time again. And here we see the Spirit of the Lord moving upon Samson. It would be the source of his great strength that we're going to see later. Usually we think of Samson as some man with a big guy with big, huge, rippling muscles. But I don't really think it was who he was. I think many times people looked at him and thought, how can this guy be strong? Because he was probably a little scrawny dude. I don't know. But whether he looked strong or not, the strength was the Spirit of God who made him strong. And so thus begins the life of Samson. And that leads us into chapter 14, where now we're going to see him begin to grow. And remember, during this period now, they're under oppression by the Philistines for these 40 years. So we're going to kind of pick up where Samson is now an adult. And he seeks a wife. Look at chapter 14, verse 1. Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. And so he went up and he told his father and his mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah and the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. And then his father and his mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. So we see the first time that Samson now is really going to fall or falter. He sees a woman. I got to be careful how I say this, but man, the downfall of many a great man, right? He saw a woman. It seemed to be the case of love at first sight. So what he saw with his eyes, the beauty, that's what captured him. He doesn't know her yet. He's not even actually met her yet. He just saw her. And he wants to marry her right off the bat. She pleases me well. That literally, with the wording there, what it's saying is, she's right in my eyes. She's the right one. So what he really cared about at this point was the things that looked good to him. Not how they looked to God, not the fact that, one, she's from the enemy that's oppressing us, that you're being raised to deliver us from. He may not even know that yet. And that's a dangerous thing, right? When we see things, because see, Satan, he's going to take the worldly things, he's going to make them look pretty. He's going to make them look appealing, and he's going to want to draw you in. It happens to all of us, but that's a dangerous thing, and it's a dangerous place to be. And it's very easy for all of us to fall in love with someone or something that we have no business even dabbling in or being in love with. That love at first sight feels wonderful. But you see, it's about so much more than that. Marriage, husband and wives, love. It's about so much more than just that initial attraction, that feeling. Samson should have never been in Timnah amongst the Philistines to begin with, the camp of the enemy. If you don't put yourself in places you're not supposed to be, there's less chance of you falling for the trap of being attracted to something you're not supposed to be attracted to. He should have never even been down there in the camp of the Philistines to begin with. But even though he's there, and then he shows this sinful disregard for both his parents and for God's will. He demands, get her for me, for she pleases me. Of course, his parents, they try to dissuade him. They try to talk him out of it. But he's swept up at this point by his passion. He's determined. But if you recall, they had been commanded not to intermarry with the pagan nations around them. As a chosen people, as God's chosen people to be separated from the world and holy, they were not to intermarry with the pagan nations around them. And here he is now, supposed to be a Nazirite man, dedicated wholly to God. And that's the first thing he's going to do. Even as non-believers, as Christians, we're told not to be unequally yoked with non-believers, as believers with non-believers. And it's not because they're not lovable. It's not because they're evil or bad people. It's because there's a there's going to be a friction there. There's going to be a conflict of the worldly things and the godly things. And it's too easy then to get confused about our priorities when we do that. Is Jesus Christ our priority at that point? When you have two people in a relationship that disagree on the most important things in life, that's a hard life to live. Now, that being said, there are people that are in these marriages, and if someone goes against God's plan and they marry an unbeliever, or if you're already in a relationship and one spouse becomes a believer, there's specific commands and there's specific ways to handle those situations too. And we clearly wrote that we do everything possible to stay in that relationship, do the best, be the best spouse we can be to win them over for Christ. But here, for the Israelites, they were never supposed to even be in this position. And Samson goes and puts himself in that position. Samson goes directly against the will of God. And yet God is still going to use him. And he's going to use him in a mightily way. But he uses him despite of his sin, not because of his sin. Let's make that clear. He goes on in verse 4 there, but his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. And so we're going to see now, as the rest of this chapter is going to show, some good is going to ultimately come out of this ungodly marriage. God's going to take this situation and he's going to use it. He's going to use it in a mighty way. And now that's not to say that God couldn't have or would not have preferred to use Samson in a more godly way by not having to take this situation and turn it around. But he does use it. And God uses a lot of things in our lives for his good. And many Philistines are going to be killed, and they're going to be kept off balance in their attempts to dominate Israel now under Samson for a while. And so he can make even the evil that man does serve his purposes. Just realize that never justifies the evil that man does. Okay? So God in this case is seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. He's going to use what Samson's relationship does here to make that move. So for that reason, he allows Samson to do what he wants to do. And even though the act itself is sinful, God allows it for reasons, both in Samson's life and for reasons on a larger scale for the community. And oftentimes we hear people today use this as kind of a justification for their own sin. You know, maybe my desire to marry this non-Christian woman, even though I'm already a believer now, I'm going to use it for good to win her over. Or I'm going to use it. Samson's not the one saying he's going to do this or he's going to win her over or he's going to use it for God. That may or may not work out. That's up to God. God's the one that can use it if he chooses to. It's not a justification for us to believe that will happen, for us to then go and sin. That's the point I want to make. Because it's going to come at some great personal cost, and it's going to come at some personal cost for Samson. And so God can always use far better when we're obedient. And so my message to you is to be obedient, unlike Samson. So he goes on though in verse 5, and Samson does what he wants. And so Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and he came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and he talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. And he took some of it in his hand, and he went along eating. And when he came to his father and his mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. And you may be thinking, well, that's kind of a weird story. Why is all that in there? Well, there's some lessons in this. First, he came to the vineyards of Timnah. Remember his vow? The Nazirite vow? Not only can you not drink wine, but you can't eat anything of the grape products. You don't need to be anywhere near a vineyard or anything of the grape. And he goes to a vineyard. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. Don't put